Okay, good evening. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to this public event of the combined Classics Library, which is both the Library of the Institute of Classical Studies and the Hellenic and Roman Library of the Hellenic Society and Roman Society. This event is titled Wood and Ceramic, Introducing Digital Methods with Classics Library Special Collections. And we will have a series of short presentations combined to introduce these collections, which will last about 45 minutes, and then we will have 15 minutes or so for discussion and questions. So please feel free to ask questions afterwards. Please do all keep your microphones muted, and if you're not one of the presenters, also your camera turned off until and unless you decide to ask questions at the end. The session is being recorded, so be aware that if you do unmute yourself, you will be in the recording, and you may appear on YouTube at some point in the future. The speakers today are not in the order that they're presenting. Are Joanna Ashe, the librarian of the Combined Classics Library, Jen Baird, Professor of Archaeology at Birkbeck, myself, Gabriel, Bodard, Reader in Digital Classics at the Institute of Classical Studies and the Digital Humanities Research Hub here at the School of Advanced Study, Aaron Fordwoh, the Leventis Digitisation Officer at the Classics Library, Paul Jackson, the Deputy Librarian at the Classics Library, Valeria Vitale, a researcher in artificial intelligence and geographic methods at the Alan Turing Institute, and Alicia Walsh, the archaeologist at Recollection Heritage. That is basically the introduction. We're going to briefly introduce the special collections of the Classics Library, and two of them in particular, the Wood notebooks and the Ehrenberg Bequest. And we're going to have a couple of examples of how those collections are used in research and practice, and then also some discussion on how they're used in engagement and teaching. And we'll sum up at the end, and as I say, we can answer any questions you have then. So I think now I will hand over to Joanna, who's going to introduce the library and its collections.
Thanks, Gabby. Okay, so I'm going to start by just giving a little bit of background on the library itself, and then talk about a bit more about some of our special collections. So the library really came into being with the Hellenic Society in 1879, and there was a single bookcase which very quickly grew, and in 1904 there were 2,600 volumes reported as being there. In 1910 the Roman Society came along, and the collections were combined into a single joint library of the two societies, which moved to Bloomsbury Square. And by about 1924-25, there were 12,000 volumes in the collection, and the library had to move again to Bedford Square. In 1953, the Institute of Classical Studies is founded and comes along, joins forces with the two societies to create the combined library, which of course continues growing. In 1958, it moved to Gordon Square, now around 30,000 books, and it has continued to grow ever since. In 97, we moved to Senate House, which is where we currently are now. There's been a little bit of moving around inside the building, but we've been in our current space in the building since around 2009. And the size of the library now is a little over 136,000 books and almost 23,000 bound periodicals, for a total of around 160,000 items in the collection. They are almost completely on the open shelves at the moment within the library, that can be browsed by people coming in, with a very few exceptions that have had to be stored elsewhere. And the special collections, our rare books and our archives, are all stored in secure climate-controlled storage as well, so they're not on the open shelves. The rare books rooms hold a little over 2,000 volumes, and we've got lots of lovely treasures in there. So please do come and have a look sometime when you're in London. We do love showing them off to people. Some of the highlights from the collection are the wood collection that I'm not going to talk about now because Paul will tell us all about that today. That's one of the ones we're featuring today. The travel diaries of Mabel and Theodore Bent. We've got books annotated by Michael Ventris that complement the Ventris archive that's held by the Institute of Classical Studies. And the oldest volume in the library dates from 1501. Another notable archive that is on the open shelves is the David J. Smith Mosaic Archive, which is a collection of books, periodicals, pamphlets, photographs and slides on mosaics. It's added to every year with the support of the Roman Research Trust. We also have a small collection of antiquities within the library. I won't talk about those now because that is the other special collection that we are featuring tonight. So we will talk more about that one a little bit later on. A little bit more information about who uses the library. So we have two main categories of member in the library. Reference-only membership through the Institute, which is open to postgraduate research students and academics in classics from all over the world. And of course, members of one or both of the two societies. Membership of the societies gives borrowing rights for anything that can be borrowed in the library, which is around 2/3 of the collection. I have to say, during the pandemic, library staff have been very, very busy posting books out to society members all over the UK to keep people in touch with their books during the pandemic and support classics research. One other thing, obviously, that the pandemic has done is to accelerate the uptake of digital engagement with the collections, as people couldn't come in physically, which is particularly timely with this sort of the topic that we've got tonight. The library was lucky enough recently to have received generous funding to support digitisation initiatives. That's from both the Levantis Foundation and also from the Classical Association. And we are very grateful to both of those organisations for helping to fund us. And this is really helping us to make more of our collections and our older out of copyright items available online, more widely available to everyone, and also to open up resources such as the wood collection to new methods of engagement and research, as we'll be talking about this afternoon. There is a fundraising campaign, Hellenic and Roman Library, which is the current name for the joint library of the two societies. So I will flag that here on the website there. Please do, if you're able, to support the fundraising campaign to help ensure the future of the library. And also, if you're not already a member of one of the societies, please do think about joining because, as I say, yeah, lots of benefits of use in the library and able to borrow books as well. On that note, I am going to pass over to Paul to give some more detail about the wood collection itself.
Hello. Tell you a bit about the wood collection. It was given to the library by Arthur Henry Wood and his family in summer 1925, just as we were moving into Bedford Square. That was 2 or 3 moves ago. As well as being a descendant of Robert Wood, he was an assistant secretary to the Board of Education and chaired the Mental Deficiency Committee that produced the Wood Report in 1929. Now, Robert Wood, a scholar, civil servant, politician, and Jacobite, was born in 1717 and died in 1771. Material in the wood collection that we have mostly relates to his second grand tour in 1750-51. This took in the Aegean, the coast of Asia Minor and the Middle East, and brought Palmyra and Baalbek to the attention of a wider public. As a result of his first grand tour in 1743, he was invited to join the expedition by 2 antiquarians, John Bouverie, the tour's archaeologist who died near Smyrna on the 19th of September 1750 at the beginning of the tour, and James Dawkins, another Jacobite who bankrolled the expedition with money from the family slave-run sugar plantations in Jamaica. He was born and died there. Samuel Johnson used him as an example of the good use of wealth in that he was able to buy protection from bandits when visiting Palmyra. Visual representations of the tour, including detailed measurements of the buildings examined, were provided by Giovanni Battista Borra, the Italian architect and engineer, who used designs that he copied on the expedition in his later work of redesigning country houses. His work can still be seen at Stowe School. We have in the collection an early 19th century transcript of the official record of the expedition that was compiled by Dawkins, as well as the original of a small section of the expedition diary. The diary doesn't include Palmyra and Baalbek, which disappoints a lot of readers, as that material was published by Wood in 2 huge volumes in 1753 and 1757. We also have 3 sections of Wood's own diaries, which specialize in the topography of the sites visited, as well as notebooks of inscriptions copied by Wood and others, Bouverie's diary in ink and pencil, or ink over pencil, left unfinished by his death, and 3 sketchbooks by Borra. Borra's finished engravings are in Wood's Palmyra and Baalbek volumes, of which we have the 1827 reprint. Wood's other interest was in Homer, which he believed could be mined for factual detail on the location of Troy, as well as Homeric daily life. We have Wood's interleaved Homer, which went with him on the expedition. It contains his analysis of Homer covering the environ of Troy, geography in general, critical remarks, beauties, very 18th century, winds, women and marriages, deaths and funerals, particular customs, similes, and days of the poem, as well as texts of inscriptions from Asia Minor and elsewhere. His thoughts on Homer were encapsulated in a letter to Dawkins in Rome in the mid-1750s, of which we have a 19th century transcript. His essay on the original genius and writings of Homer, with a comparative view of the ancient and present state of the Troad, was published in 2 tiny editions in 1767 and 1769, but was not circulated widely until the posthumous 1775 edition. Gibbon was not impressed by Wood's topographical discoveries, but the early editions circulated in Germany and were translated in 1773, where they were a major influence on Friedrich August Wolff in the famous prolegomena to his 1794-5 edition of Homer and thus later scholars. I'd now like to hand over to Jen Baird, who will be talking about her Palmyra, Syria research and Wood.
Sorry, I was struggling to unmute myself there. Hopefully you can see my screen and things now. So thanks so much, everyone, for the invite. I have to say, I wouldn't have known the Wood collection existed had Gabby and Joanna and Paul not invited me in and shown me where it was and what it was. So I'm very grateful to them for that. So I come to this material as an archaeologist of Syria, having worked there until the start of the war, as well as being a researcher of the history of archaeology and archaeological archives. And as an archaeological site, Palmyra has, of course, a long history of study, and while it's mentioned in ancient texts, it left fewer traces in the classical canon than other major cities of antiquity. And as a result, its modern Western reception has been largely filtered through and framed by the kind of discovery of the site by early travelers. One of those travelers, of course, was the British antiquarian Wood, who, as we just heard from Paul, set out in 1749 with James Dawkins, wealthy heir to Jamaican sugar plantations, also ancestor of that other Dawkins who we now know, and another prosperous young Oxford scholar, Bouverie, and joined along the way by Borra, who's the Italian draftsman whose images we now know so well. As Paul was saying, that trip would be the basis for the earliest modern account of Palmyra as a ruined archaeological site, the 1753 publication you see here, The Ruins of Palmyra. And so what the ICS has is some of the materials they made along the way, literally along the way, but also on the way to making this volume. So it only occupies actually a couple of shelves of space, but this is still a really difficult collection in some ways to get your head around, being as it is a very personal accumulation of documents that had long been in private hands. So it wasn't kind of properly curated until it came into the ICS. This means it's not made up entirely of primary records made during Wood's time traveling, but also later things. Things like his daughter's copies of his original journals, and those originals, we don't have all of them in the collection itself. There's also sketches made by Borra, but not the intermediary drawings or the engravings which appeared in the publication, which are at Reba. Other things are known to be missing, or maybe in private collections we don't know about. So my initial foray into this material was very much a collaborative effort with my colleague Zina Kamash, with whom I published an article on Wood's journey to Palmyra in the bulletin of the ICS. And it's that work which I want to tell you a little bit about today, based on our analysis of some of the texts and drawings in the collection. But you can follow the link here and read it for yourself if you're interested. So one of the things we were interested to look at was the relationship between the records which were made in the field, as it were, by Wood and his colleagues, and those that were published. And so we wanted to see how their initial impressions and initial records differed from the kind of official transcripts, and how those recordings transformed in the published versions. One of the things we were able to do was look at differences between Wood's initial notes on Palmyra as preserved in his daughter's copies, and how those differed from the 1753 volume. So the survival of this account of the approach to Palmyra, so this is in volume 18A of the Wood collection. It's written in his daughter's hand, his daughter Elizabeth Wood, provides this opportunity to explore some of the complexities of how Wood's observations and memories of his trips turned into those published texts, which became kind of authoritative version. And one of the things we see is considerable embellishment within the published versions. So not only that, but in the archive, one of the surprising things maybe is that when Wood first gets to Palmyra, he's really disappointed. So it wasn't as nice as Athens or Rome. It wasn't the thing that he was looking for. And he really tones down, obviously, this distaste in the final publication. His status as discoverer of the site is linked to the status of the site itself. So he has to kind of get over his initial sadness for the book to be a success. And intentionally or not, he also very effectively silences many of the contemporary Syrian voices he encountered, both in the final publication and in 18A, which really make invisible a lot of the contemporary human presence. And yet in that same silencing, it's clear that this was a very active settlement at the time Wood and his entourage visited it, despite that painting that we saw with Paul of them discovering it as this like empty oasis. And indeed, one of the things that Wood notes is how annoyed he is that the local people keep trying to stop him from carrying off the inscriptions. He attributes this to their avarice and superstition. He thinks to them, or he doesn't have any idea that those locals might have any desire for this material themselves or any right to it, of this kind of the past that we would now call heritage of the site. And that's something that's had a really long legacy. The other thing that we looked at in detail were Borra's drawings, which we could compare to those that finally appeared in the 1753 volume. This is a page from Borra's sketchbook of the beautiful little temple of Bal Shamin, no longer there, of course. And between these things, a few themes came up. So first of all, it's just the instability of what we now consider archaeological facts. So the beautiful engravings make things look a lot more certain than they are. And a lot of translating happened between the time they're at the site and the publication. So the detail a lot of it is probably made by Borra on the ship home and not on the site. One of the things that jumps out at you at Borra's sketchbook is just their kind of very flimsy ephemerality compared with those very clear, authoritative, large-scale plates of the publication that was eventually based on them. So that's a couple of things that we did, Zina and I did in the Wood archive, and for other aspects of that, I'm going to hand you to Valeria. If I can stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you, Jen. Going to now share my screen. And okay, so from 2017 to 2019, the ICS was also one of the host institutions of the Pelagius project. So we decided to use some of this amazing material in the Wood archive and test it with one of the tools designed by the Pelagius project, this semantic annotation platform that is called Recogito. So we teamed up with Jen and with Zina, and we selected a number of pages from the Wood archive, and we brought them to Recogito. Then we piggybacked on the digital classicist seminars that was going on, and we organized a small workshop where we invited people that had no previous specific knowledge or any particular interest in the archive to annotate the documents. We even created an open link that we shared on social media so that literally anyone on the web with a link and with an account on Recogito could annotate the document. And the reasons why we did that were a few. Well, first of all, I personally wanted to test the crowdsourcing capabilities of Recogito through this experiment, but we were also very interested in discovering, in testing if the act of annotating could make the manuscript more interesting and more engaging, even to people that didn't have a previous interest in it. And also if what were the things that people would find interesting to annotate. And the answer to the first question was definitely yes. They did engage with the manuscript, and they, of course, it was a sort of self-selecting sample because we were within the ICS. So, of course, we were talking to people that had an interest in archaeology and the ancient world, but they were not specialists of wood, and they seemed to enjoy this sort of manipulation of the manuscript through the process of annotation. And about what they found interesting to annotate, I would say pretty much anything, which was a great finding for us and for me personally, because it was a great reminder that there is never a single way of analyzing a document. So some people looked at the images, some people looked at the text, and someone annotated, for example, the drawings, someone annotated place references, material features of the manuscript, material features of the digitization process, someone annotated the measurements, and even mentions of spices. There was really a very interesting variety of perspectives on the manuscript. And obviously, these annotations that were produced on the spot are not particularly accurate, are not particularly scholarly reliable, but that was never the aim of this experiment. It was really to test if the interaction enabled by the annotation would generate engagement. And we thought that that was the case. There was actually another research question that was more complex and more on the long term, and it was very much more in the area of expertise of Zina and Jan, and it was if we could use digital annotation platforms as a way to challenge those very colonial narrative that emerged into the account. And if we could use annotation to enable people who actually have a personal connection with Syrian heritage to tell different stories, to use it in a way to reappropriate that culture heritage. And of course, this is a long-term effort, and it would require a lot of work with the communities and a lot of networking, and is definitely not something that I would be able to do. But I really hope that Jen and Zina would take that further. I would be so happy to collaborate on that. And just before handing it over to Aaron, I just wanted to say something more about the digitized pages of this manuscript. We had the opportunity to participate to a small workshop about the combined application of two different imaging technologies, RTI and multispectral imaging. And we decided to use one page of the Wood notebooks as our test case. And you can see, there is a page that, looks pretty much empty, but you can tell that there are some marks that have been erased. And we wanted to see if through the imaging, we could bring up those erased content. And we were quite happy to see that, yes, through the imaging, the page really gave back some more information. You can definitely see that there used to be the layout, I think, of a city plan, and you can see the writing, it says Medina there, and you can definitely read better the title of the page. So that made us hungry for more digital imaging. And on this note, I think that I should hand it over to Aaron and stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Valeria. So, my name's Aaron. I've been working on the digitisation project here since June 2019, and the project is funded by the H.E. Leventis Foundation. So I'll just run you through some of the work through what I get up to here, and then show you some images and then some of the challenges that I face. So the software that I use and the hardware is the Book i4 kiosk book scanner, and the software which I then use to process all these images is called BCS2 imaging software. So this can scan the images with a resolution of up to 600 dpi, that's dots per inch, and then these digital images are formatted as TIFF files, which stands for tagged image format. This format is used for containing high quality graphics like photographic material, and it allows the metadata to be maintained within the file itself. So then each of these files, so it's one file per page, is then converted into a PDF, which allows it to be read and accessed. And then these PDFs are uploaded into SAS's online library SAS space, where they can be accessed by the public. So here's some examples. So this is volume 16. This is
Aaron, you're not screen sharing yet.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Perfect.
There we go. Basically, you didn't miss anything. I just showed you a picture of the scanner. Some slides here, and now we're back to. Yeah, apologies about that. So this is volume 16. So this is a sketchbook by Giovanni Battista Borra. This is the sketch of Filippo. And here we have examples of volume 1 to 5, which are the transcripts by Robert Wood's daughter of the diaries of James Dawkins. And here we can see from the scanner kind of interesting example of the pagination they've used when transcribing. So they write one way, flip it around in reverse, and go the other way. This is volume 14, so copies of inscriptions made by Robert Wood during the tour. These are undertaken to Greece, Asia Minor, and Egypt. And if we zoom in here, we can see actual detailed marks of the inscription, some of the annotation there. Moving on, this is volume 17, so another sketchbook by Giovanni Battista Borra, covering the tour of Palmyra. And here, these are examples of kind of sketches done in pencil. And if we zoom in, we can see that the paper quality itself is very ephemeral and very kind of delicate, and so are the individual pencil marks, but the scanner really has no problem picking up each of their individual notations and details within the architectural drawings. Here's another sketch, some Palmyran ruins. And this is an example of how the TIFF files, the 600 dpi high quality TIFF files, can be accessed for the public on request. And so these high quality files can then be put through other kind of digital imaging software like Photoshop and things like that. This is volume 16, one of the kind of big blockbuster pages, sketch of Vesuvius. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to highlight kind of the amount of detail that the scanner can pick up. So if we zoom in once, we can see collections of individual hatchings. And then we can zoom in even closer, and you can discern kind of individual marks. There is a limit to the amount of detail these images can contain, but they can go a lot further than this if you have the actual high quality file itself. Do the same thing again here with the sketch of Vesuvius. This time it's a pen and ink wash sketch. Zoom in once, we can see the detail, and we can get even closer and see individual marks and details with each brush stroke. And yeah, just to end up here, I'll just talk you through some of the challenges. So the main one on the day-to-day problem that I face is one of conservation. So the book scanner has a cradle which supports the books and holds and secures them in place. The paper quality, again, it will be able to, because of the cradle, you'll be able to maintain some of that and you won't damage anything really on any kind of level. But the bottom line is it's always preferable to compromise on digital image quality rather than the physical quality of material. So if it happens that you're not going to be able to get that pristine, perfect scan without damaging some of the binding or the paper, then yeah, it's always best to compromise on the scan itself. And then secondly, the imaging software I use, because of the nature of the project and kind of how fast I have to work, BCS2 software, it is good and can kind of alter some of those variables. But if you really want to kind of dig into each file itself, something like Photoshop, these TIFF files can be accessed by the public for kind of further kind of specialist manipulation. Yeah, that's all I had. Sorry about the beginning there, but I'm going to hand you over now to Joanna.
Thanks, Aaron. I will share my screen again, and we will move on to the second part of tonight's talk, which is about the collection of antiquities that we have in the library. This was left to us by Victor Ehrenberg. So a little bit of history here. Victor Ehrenberg was a German historian of the ancient world. He lived from 1891 to 1976. Initially, he studied and worked in Germany, where he was professor of ancient history at the German University in Prague from 29 to 39. And he came to Britain with his family in 1939. In the UK, he had various positions teaching classics in schools around the country. He was lecturer in ancient history and Greek at King's College, Newcastle upon Tyne, which is now part of Durham University. And he was a reader in ancient history at Bedford College, University of London. And his work concentrated on Greek history in the classical and Hellenistic periods. Here are some examples of some of his works. These are copies of books held in the library by Victor Ehrenberg, and if you search our catalogue, we have 44 works by him, although some of them are duplicates. These are just some examples of some of his better known titles. On his death in 1976, he left a substantial bequest to the ICS. This included funds that continue to support the George Grote Prize in Ancient History, which is awarded annually by the Institute, an archive that includes correspondence, lecture notes, manuscripts, annotated proofs of some of his books, and various other papers from his life. And that's held as part of the library archives and housed in our rare books rooms. And the part of the collection that we're going to talk about today, which is his collection of antiquities. This was left to the Institute on the condition that, as well as being displayed, it was used for teaching and handling. So it's very much meant to be a collection that people engage with on a regular basis. And over the last few years, we have used items from the collection in various teaching sessions, mostly focusing on photogrammetry and 3D modeling techniques. So there are 155 items in the collection. They're mostly small objects from the Minoan Mycenaean period through to the Byzantine. 41 of the better preserved items, mostly statues and vases, as you can see on the screen here, are stored in 2 display cases in the library. The other items are all stored in our rare books rooms. The items not on display are mostly potsherds, but also some items that are not quite of the same quality as these, or that just won't stand up by themselves, so they weren't suitable for display in the cases. I also have, if you can see on the screen here, I brought through an example of one of the items from the case. This is a kylix from around the 4th century BC. As part of this collection, we also have Ehrenberg's catalogues. So there was an initial selection of notes by Ehrenberg. That's what you can see in the center of the screen, and the drawing on the right there. These were typewritten notes with handwritten annotations and corrections, brief descriptions of each object, notes on provenance, and as you can see in some cases, drawings. There's a later typewritten catalogue, which is the example you see on the left here, and it contains much the same information as the first, but better quality photographs throughout, although at times we lose some of the information on provenance, so some information did fall by the way there. And we also have entries in the library catalogue, although only for the 41 items that are on display at the moment. And you can see at the bottom of the screen there a screenshot from our library catalogue with the simple detail in there. And again, there's not quite all the detail makes it through every time. And just for comparison, here is the actual object that all these different catalogue entries are in regard to. So I just thought I would tie that together from the object to the different entries there. So obviously there's still work to be done on cataloguing the items that are not on display, although they're in Ehrenberg's catalogue. We don't have an electric catalogue for those, although Alicia has done some work on doing that. And on that note, I am going to pass over to Alicia to talk more about working with the collection and the work that she's done there.
Great, thank you, Joanna. Yeah, so in the summer of 2019, I was chosen by the Roman Society's Museum and Heritage Placement Program to spend 2 weeks at the library cataloging and creating 3D models of this collection. So in terms of cataloging, what I did was went through the original notes and transcribed Ehrenberg's notes and created a more condensed database with all this information, numbering the items and compiling links to the existing entries on the online library catalog, as well as links to the 3D models on the Sketchfab page shown here. So during this time, out of the items that I cataloged, we chose 10 of these items to create 3D models of. And we did this using Agisoft Metashape, the Photogrammetry software. And as you may know, photogrammetry is the process of taking overlapping 2D images to create a 3D point cloud. So of these items recorded, they were then uploaded to Sketchfab, this online library of 3D models. And we dedicated a page to this collection, and these models are free to view and download. They are copyrighted under the Creative Commons Attribution License. So you're free to use it and adapt it as long as you give credit to the Institute. So descriptions from the catalog were also added to the Sketchfab page, including the item's name, the description, its date of origin, and measurements. And viewing these items digitally will help to carry out Ehrenberg's wishes of using the items for teaching and handling, as these items can be quite fragile, which makes handling risky. Viewing them digitally can be a good alternative. And as I said, they are free to download, so you can also download them and 3D print them, which is another way to assist in the teaching and handling. And it also allows these items to be accessible more widely outside of the museum or the library. And yeah, the final thing I did was to write up the workflow of the digitization process so that students or researchers in the future may continue with this project in the hopes that all of the items in the collection can be available online to view. And with that, I'll hand it off to Gabby for more on photogrammetry and 3D printing.
Great, thank you very much, Alicia. So let me share my screen as well. Okay, I hope that's coming through. I can no longer see Zoom, so that presumably means you're seeing my screen. So yes, I'm going to talk about the use of photogrammetry and 3D printing as teaching and training methods, and how we use both, well, in particular, the Ehrenberg collection as part of that. So as Alicia said, we are primarily using photogrammetry to produce these models, and Alicia talked a little bit about the method, the taking of multiple photographs and combining this into a 3D model. This is something that's part of what we teach and how we produce this. So this is a view of the various different photographs spread around an image, and you can see at the bottom there the photographs themselves, all taken from slightly different angles of an image. These slides are all taken from training materials that we've been involved with in various ways. And we also have training in various types of photography that are used for photogrammetry. This example here obviously isn't from an object in the classics library. This is something out in the field, but it's the same sort of principle, taking lots of photographs from in a particular way. The other part of this then is creating the 3D model using photogrammetry and then rendering that 3D model. Here's the same calyx that Joanna showed you a minute ago. This is one of 200 or so photographs that were taken of it. Those photographs can then be combined into this 3D model. Without the texture information, we're not interested in the color and the surface image anymore, because this is being modeled now in 3D printing software. And then this is a picture of it having just been printed from the 3D printer. You may see that it doesn't look exactly like the calyx. It has these supports under the handles that have to then be cut off afterwards, because you couldn't 3D print something without those supports. But that's we have two different printers, 3D printers in the School of Advanced Study, and we use them specifically for training in this sort of technology, and we can use objects from the Ehrenberg collection for all stages of that process, for the photography, the photogrammetry, the modeling, and the printing of them. We teach these in many different contexts. We have one of the modules that we teach at the ICS that classic students in London and sometimes elsewhere can take for credit or otherwise is this module on digital approaches to cultural heritage, which includes a significant 3D component. And in a normal year, when everything takes place physically in the building, students get hands-on experience of photogrammetry by handling the Ehrenberg objects and making 3D models of them themselves. This is all part, by the way, of the Sonokisis Digital Classics program, which runs every year and is an international program. So these training resources we produce are available to people all over the world on open licenses. Obviously, unless you're physically based in London, using the Ehrenberg collection as your practical experience is not going to be terribly convenient. But the resources that we use for training is part of that. And my students in London who do take this have to do for their assessment, they have to do a practical project. And one of those practical projects, one of the options for those practical projects is to do photogrammetry on an object and to do various things with the 3D model that they've produced there. Other things that we do using these, we've had discussions on using 3D printing as part of ancient art and archaeology pedagogy. This is a workshop that Valeria organized a couple of years ago. And we have a summer school which we run every summer, which again we're hoping soon will be in physically in place in the institute and the library in future years, where people can again get hands-on experience of modeling. And indeed printing, and also as Alicia mentioned, the Museum and Heritage Summer Placements that the Roman Society sponsors involves usually about one student a year coming to the institute and to the library to contribute and continue the work that Alicia started 2 years ago on this cataloguing and imaging and putting more 3D models up on Sketchfab. So Alicia put up the first 10. We've been unable to have students physically in the building for the last 2 years, but in future we've got another 140 or so objects for people to continue working on. So it'll be a little while before we run out of stuff to do. So that's sort of a summary of where we are in terms of using this material. I'll hand over to Joanna to sum up.
Thank you, Gabby. I'd just like to say thank you to all of you and to all of our speakers for coming along. I hope you found what we've talked about interesting and inspiring, and that we've managed to show you some of the paths that these collections have taken from classical antiquity through the people who collected them or visited the sites over the years or created the resources to the library, and then on into digital versions and engagement with research and with teaching. We would be really, really keen to hear from any of you about any questions you have about anything that we've got. Please do pop questions into the chat, and we've got 15 minutes to talk about anything that comes up. And also, if you've got any ideas for future engagement or for things you'd like to do with these resources, or you'd like to see us do with the resources, then please do talk about that as well, because we'd love to hear that. I will also put in one last plug to think about donating something to the Hull fundraising campaign if you possibly can, and the link for that is in the chat. So on that note, I would like to encourage everyone to submit questions. So yeah, I either pop something in the chat or just stick your hand up and we'll unmute you and you can ask us. If anyone wants to fund us to do multispectral imaging of all of the sketchbooks, then that would be very exciting, because it would be really, really lovely to see what's hidden on all those pages that's gradually disappeared over the years. The one page that Valeria managed to do just whet our appetite for more, really. So I have a question here. Do we take on volunteers to scan the artifacts? Yeah, I don't see why not.
Yeah, in principle, yes. We, I mean, that's what the the various placements and interns who come from various places are. I mean, we'd obviously have to have a conversation first, and we'd have to do it at a convenient time to provide the training and so forth. So ideally, when there's other people around doing that as well. But in principle, absolutely. Drop either Joanna or I an email. Yeah.
Put our emails in the chat just so that there for anyone who wants to get in touch or wants to follow up on any of this, really. Question for Jen and Zena: any clues in the archive as to why Elizabeth Wood did the transcriptions?
Oh God, I don't know. Zena, help me. Catherine, you're probably in a better position to say that than we are, and you helped us so much when we were drafting that article. So thank you so much. I don't know. She's a lady of leisure who's got all this wonderful material that she knows is important, but doesn't quite know what to do with. I wish I knew more. We had to do so much even just to find her first name, which isn't actually in the archive anywhere. Zena, ideas?
I can't help you anymore. Sorry, Jen. There was nothing in the archive that would indicate to us why she did that.
I mean, that is like one of these. We need to do more research on this, right? On like the fragmentation of the collection and where all of the rest of the pieces are of that puzzle, and more about her. I mean, we looked in all of the obvious places, but. I wish I knew more. Sorry, it's not a very interesting answer. Thank you, Zena, for.
Oh, well, at least we could both say we didn't
know. Dylan, the software is called BCS2. I can type it in the chat as well. It's
sort of people are looking in the chat, but Michael Metcalf has commented about like needing to rewrite those originals because of really poor. I mean, that's certainly a possibility. She's definitely trying to organize things. But then one of the things that happens that makes it complicated is the collection gets rebound. So actually that volume 18A and B is called A and B because one side is this way up and the other side is that way up. And then at one point they're bound together. And so yeah, it's definitely something interesting happening.
There's a question from Charlotte. Have we been able to engage 18th century art or architectural historians with this? Anyone want to take that one?
I think we didn't. I just wanted to add that while doing the annotation, it came up that Borra had reused some of the sketches in his work in Italy, and there are other archives about his work elsewhere that have quite clear connections with the sketches from Palmyra. And I would love to do more work around that. So yes, let's engage the idea of historians.
Catherine had her hand raised. Feel free to unmute and comment.
Sure, I'll say hi. No, I was just wondering about the binding. As you can tell, I'm fascinated by the wood collection, and what you said about some of the some of works being, bound or rebound at a later point and bound together. Because from the description in the hand list, it sounds almost as if he was taking quite luxuriously bound notebooks into the field with him, which sounds either unusual or incredibly swanky. And I wondered if you got a sense that he used a particular kind of, or his traveling companions, a particular kind of notebook or a particular kind of type of paper or notebook for a particular purpose. Do you see what I mean? Because in the pictures there were lots of different sizes as well. There were clearly really big, almost folio volumes, and then very, very tiny small octavos.
I mean, they've certainly each got a preference, is what I would say. Like, there's not loads of woods, like field stuff actually there. Like most of what sorry, I haven't actually looked at, I should have gone through the lists today. So a lot of it is kind of secondary for wood's actual material. And for Borra's, like most of them are like these teeny, like really small, like pocket books. Which is really surprising if you're used to encountering Borra through these like huge engravings that take up the whole table. But that would be a good task to sit down and see if like they're more personal in their choices.
Yeah, I suppose it ties in with a more sort of general point about translating and publishing in different media, which is around the kind of haptics of original objects, and then how you kind of render that when you're digitizing or you respect that. But actually some of what Aaron was showing us with the scans and what Valeria, there are ways of giving a kind of sense of the haptic qualities of an object, aren't there? So
yeah, I mean, that was one of the things we had fun with Recogito. Was I was nervous about turning Borra's really ephemeral, drafty, small scale books into something that looked actually much more official than it was. And so, but those interventions through Recogito let us kind of speak to that a little bit.
We were also really keen in the publication not to enhance Borra's images, because they are really light and they are very difficult to see. And we felt if we enhanced that, we weren't really giving people a true indication of what the archive was like.
In terms of notebooks as well, we get the impression, don't we, that that wood at least was possibly short of paper at various points. I mean, he took a lot of his notes in the blank pages in between the pages of his Homer volume and things like that. That they didn't have unlimited paper with them.
That's not that unusual in the 1750s. I mean, it gets worse, of course, when the 7 Years' War breaks out, and then there are all kinds of issues with all kinds of shortages of commodities. But I can see quite a lot of parallels with some other archives I've looked at. But it can then, I mean, a lot of these are dated, which is great, because it can also then make dating very problematic if people are reusing the same paper as they were using 10 years ago. So.
Has anybody? So I'm going to ask a question of other people in the group while we're waiting for any other questions. Have any of us tracked down any other manuscripts in related collections that are either part of Wood's or Borra's or other people's work that obviously aren't here but would be part of a meta collection?
There's sketches as well as in Reba. The finished drawings for a lot of the sketches that we have are in Yale. I understand they came up for sale in the 1960s. We couldn't afford them. There was a paper very recently done in the British Museum. I've forgotten for the second who it was by, about Wood and the Troad, and there's a map of the Troad in the Bibliothèque Nationale. by Borra. I would love to come across anything else by Wood. I know that we've had scholars visiting who've been following up Dawkins, and there's nothing in Richard Dawkins is still in the same house, but there's nothing relevant in the house anymore, apparently. And that's poor Bouverie. I think we've probably got all his remains.
Reba's digital interface is less generous though. So they have amazing scans of them, but they want you to pay to download them or pay to print them. And actually the interface that lets you search their digital collections is actually designed to sell you stuff. So it's a very different approach to digital archives. Not that I have opinions on such things.
Oh, one thing whether it's worth mentioning is that in the British Library has a copy of the auction catalogue of Wood's collection from 1772, which is very luscious and very where is everything now, and sort of original versions of the proof versions of the plates and so forth. It's worth looking if you're following up that kind of thing. I went once and I probably should have taken a copy of it.
Eleanor also has a question for Alicia about photogrammetry software.
Yeah, thank you. The photogrammetry software I used was Agisoft Metashape, used to be called Agisoft Photoscan. And for the post-processing of the models, I used Mesh Mixer. So I can type those in the chat too if you want to look them up.
Okay, so my Zoom teacherness can't handle quiet. So I'll tell you about the next thing that we're trying to do with that Zena and I, and Valeria too, but she doesn't know yet, hope to do with some of this material is to use it to, with a colleague of ours, Adnan Al-Mohammed, who's a Syrian, who's going to be Birkbeck for the next year as a visiting fellow, to use social media to bring some of these Palmyrene diaspora home a bit and get see what Syrians make of all this, see what in the light of everything that's going on, talk to them about also their opinions of what the archive is doing in London, that kind of thing. Right, Zena, I see Zena nodding, so she's, yeah. We've only just started, Adnan's fellowship just started a couple of weeks ago. So.
I'm on board.
We really need that. We're just thinking about like Recogito is so great, but that it's not where people are. And there's such great stuff recently on different kinds of encounters with digital material, and so many very active Syrian archaeology groups on Facebook and things. We just thought, let's try different venues. Let's see how people respond.
Great to think about how we capture that and add it to the archive to expand that.
Absolutely.
Well, the great thing about Recogito's annotation is that they can be downloaded and stored and analyzed, which, it could be a very interesting way to enrich the collection and also see what are the categories that people came up with for the annotation. So some sort of, taxonomy related to the manuscript. I would find that really interesting. Of course, our test pilot was very small, it would be, it would be good to have a bigger run, or even better, a series, maybe with different audiences, and then start comparing the information. But I'd be really curious and interested in seeing what comes up.
Well, we are at the end of our allotted hour. If there's no other immediate questions, and I don't see any in the chat or any hands raised, I think we should thank all the presenters again, and thank all of you in the audience for coming along, and hope to see some of you in the library, physically or virtually, in the future. Thank you all very much.